Hi, everyone. Pastor Galen, lead pastor at Cheyenne Hills Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We hope that these podcasts will be a real encouragement to you on your spiritual journey. You can also connect with Cheyenne Hills at CheyenneHills.org. Hope you enjoy the program.
We are across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast. This is the first time we've done this live, and the first time that you've seen Ken Will live. Now, some of you know Ken, but he's been around our church for a long time. But they know you as the voice, the deep voice. But this is the face that goes with the voice, ladies and gentlemen. And so Ken, what we've been doing is going through, and when the three of us meet, we go through on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we air the reading of the book of Genesis, about 10, 12-minute devotionals. Yeah. And so, we were getting ready to move forward into calling of Abraham. And since we have the technology now, we thought, well, what if we could go back? So we're going to give a shot at going back and talking about some of those things that we tried to paint word pictures with the plate tectonics and how that moved and how the fountains of the deep. We were doing this with our hands and no one could see them. But so Ken, would you introduce this first clip and the title so people can actually find it if they wanted to? But this first clip is really interesting.
It's from the series Is Genesis History that is hosted by Del Tackett.
Right. And
then this actual episode or this clip is from How Did Catastrophic Plate Tectonics Cause Noah's Flood? And it features geologist Dr. Andrew Snelling. Okay, and when he actually starts, they're talking about a guy in the late 1700s that came out with the supercontinent theory, and he was... people scoffed at that initially. And what really sold it was after World War II, they had all these sonar soundings of the Atlantic Ocean, and they realized there was this ridge through the Atlantic Ocean. And anyway, so he makes reference to this guy that was back in the 1700s that first came out with that theory.
So let's take a look at this.
So he was looking at this from a Genesis paradigm.
Absolutely. He was thinking, the Bible describing all the waters to gather together in one place at the time of creation, so the land was in one place, and the fountains of the great deep represented a pre-flood pseudocontinent that was split apart by volcanism, by volcanic activity coming up through rifts and splitting it apart. And he was thinking of continental sprint, the pre-flood supercontinent breaking apart and the fragments sprinting across the surface of the earth to open up the Atlantic Ocean and produce the configuration of continents that we had today.
So this is just a little clip of showing that they basically believe that all the land was in one location, all touching one another.
Yeah.
And then these continental divides or rifts and the oceanic sub-oceanic water, I guess you would call it, comes from the fountains of the deep and bursts up and pushes these things apart. Now, he says something that's interesting. He actually mentions the sprint. And that's one of the things that we both have heard before, that these continents probably move faster than we think. It's not like inch by inch or even centimeter by centimeter, but pretty quickly.
Conventional wisdom or conventional theory, they say that even the continents are still moving, but they move at about the pace that your fingernail grows.
Okay.
And they're saying, no, it would have been meters per second.
At that particular time.
Yeah. When the fountains of the deep separated and it just, things happen much, much faster than.
No, I think it's fascinating. Now, you and I both, we went to find some places and I appreciate you actually brought something from like this decade. Actually, it was in the last 2 or 3 years that it was main. Unfortunately, my information comes from I think it comes back from the 70s. And this guy that put it together is from MIT. You actually looked him up.
Yeah, I looked up his bio. I can read it.
Yeah, would you mind doing
it
that?
Now? So I'll just kind of give a brief summary, but he received his PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, and he was a National Science Foundation Fellow, taught math, physics, computer science, retired Air Force colonel, West Point graduate. I mean, this guy's got an incredible resume. Let's see. He was a professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, chief of science and technology studies at Air War College. So anyways, but this is kind of interesting. It says for most of his life, he was an evolutionist, but after years of study, he became convinced of the scientific validity of creation and a global flood.
There you go.
Anyways, yeah.
Quite a resume. And say his name again.
Walt Brown.
Dr. Walt Brown.
Yes.
And so I saw this, I told you guys 150 years ago is when I saw it, but I don't know, probably 15 or 20 years ago. And I've been looking for it because all through Genesis, I thought I was going to show this clip and I knew we had the technology coming. So now we have the technology. It's an old clip. He's wearing, older style, but I'll tell you, the guy, he's got a big brain and it's a great resume. I think it's fascinating to show. And actually what he does is shows in kind of a animated fashion some of the things you just described. So let's take a look at what Dr. Walt Brown had to say.
As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. All along this globe-encircling rupture, fountains of water jetted supersonically, almost 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains, such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day. And it describes these events about 5,000 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains eroded the rock on both sides of the crack, producing huge volumes of sediments that settled out of this muddy water all over the Earth. These sediments trapped and buried plants and animals, forming the fossil record. This erosion widened the rupture. Eventually, the width was so great that the compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, and buckled. The portions of the hydroplate that buckled down formed ocean trenches. Those that buckled upward formed mountains. This is why the major mountain chains are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. On the continents, each bowl-shaped depression or basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes.
The demonstrations you have just witnessed of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity supports the biblical story of the deluge in every detail.
It almost sounds like that wide world of sports. You remember that voice? This is in every detail, but so it really
reminds me of any documentary I had in elementary school.
Yes, exactly. And mine in college, but we won't bring that up. But thanks a lot for that, Julie. But you know what? I think he says a lot of things that Ken, I always wanted to highlight. For me to highlight, you can pick up some ideas too. But he says those tectonic plates were moving 45 miles an hour. Is that right? Is that what he's saying?
Well,
that's amazing.
I think there's a little bit of variation in that with like Dr. Andrew Snelling. I didn't get the idea that they move quite that fast, but still it's significantly faster than at the length your fingernails grow.
So, but the thing that's a picture in my mind that I couldn't paint the word picture is having these tectonic plates move and then kind of wrinkle up like a napkin, if you will, when they hit they moved along pretty quickly, whatever that speed was. And then when they hit a space where it was, a rise or whatever, then it just kind of folded up and the mountains, arose and those, he said the oceanic, what are those called? Those huge caverns, underneath the ocean, they formed. And I just think it's a fascinating picture. Now, one thing, here's my question. When he said that, he said that's why on the mountains and in the oceans, they have, the way I took it, the same layer of sediment, same kind of sediment. And so basically when that sediment came out and flung itself over the land, is that right? Tell me again what are you thinking about that part of it? Well,
just to my understanding, I mean, that there are the same layers, and then some of them buckled up, and I guess there is, I mean, I am not really qualified to say, but
yeah, I mean,
with the subduction, I mean, where there's this layer of rock, and then it gets pushed underneath the other one.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. But I've heard that you go around the world and you're going to find that same layer. Let's just take limestone. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that limestone's found everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
And so how did it get distributed like that? Well, this explains it. It could have come out and you know, you saw that water coming out and goes 20 miles up in the air. Can you imagine the fountain? You talk about fountains.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting going back to the scripture then when they say about the fountains of the deep bursting forth and thinking of 20 miles in the air. That really captivated me.
Yeah. And then all the sediment, you know, and then that's all thrown up into the air and it starts settling down on different levels, I guess you could say, and creating the different layers. And then when these layers moving, and then they start buckling up like a napkin, like they show there. It shows exactly what I was trying to describe. When you drive from Cheyenne to Laramie, you see the buckling, and you see the exposure of all that sediment, right? And it does. It looks like it's like it was all together, and all of a sudden you can see this went this way and this went this way, and you see this shelf take place. And I don't know. I just think it explains things in a way that. If you look at from a biblical perspective and a flood perspective, it makes sense of a lot of things that we see and explains them. So I think it's fascinating.
And the Garden of the Gods down there at Colorado Springs, I mean, it just real blatant evidence of tilting and tipping.
That was just tilted straight up, weren't they? And it's all sediment rock. It was flat probably, and it buckled straight up. And the ridges down, those hogs backs is what they call them, down through Boulder and even down through Golden. Those would be similar. I've seen those before. It looks definitely like a buckle. Yeah. And it just looked like the ground just breaks and shows that. Yep. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I know these are some video. Hopefully it helped you out there to see, and we're not just drawing pictures with our voices and waving our hands wildly. We can actually see some of these things. And so I think these are fascinating type pictures. And so guys, thanks for diving in, and we're going to take maybe a few more flashbacks. We can find some other video that helps us understand some of these things. There's one in Del Tackett that talked about the sedimentary layers. I'd like to dive into that one. That was maybe we can do that next time.
Okay.
Until then, thank you for joining us, and we will dive back into Genesis very soon. Thanks for being here.